Hello, my name is Greg Massey, and this is episode number 61 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. And in continuing with the theme of March, the theme of innovation, this week's interview is with Buzz Gravelle. And Buzz is a composer, guitarist, music professor out in California. And I first encountered him on Instagram because he devotes a lot of his energy to promoting the fretless classical guitar. And when you hear a fretless classical guitar, I mean, it's such a beautiful sounding instrument, and it's so rare to hear. You don't really hear too much about fretless guitars. There's the fretless bass guitar, and obviously there's a number of different instruments in different cultures which are fretless. But, like the oud, for example. But it was really interesting to me to see someone promoting a fretless guitar here in America. And so I was very excited to reach out and get this interview going with Buzz and to hear about how he came upon the fretless guitar, and also to promote his music because he writes really amazing music for it, and and just promoting his vision, which is to really, he wants to spread the word of fretless guitar around the world, really. And to that end, he's started up his own company, G&G Guitars, which is an exclusive reseller of very affordably priced fretless classical guitars that are made by the company Altamira, which he'll talk about. Obviously you'll hear the music that he's been putting out. He's always putting videos out on YouTube or on Instagram showing off the models that he's selling, but also just the different techniques and everything or different sounds that you can get with a fretless classical guitar. And, I asked him if he's making a book eventually, and he said he is. He is working on kind of a method for people who would feel kind of overwhelmed at the prospect of playing fretless guitar. I myself am definitely going to be saving up to buy one this year because I see him play it, and I feel inspired, and I just want to get one and just start playing and see what happens. His approach to music, he'll talk a lot about his theory about audio creative disruptions. The way he approaches alternate tunings, the way he approaches learning how to play the fretless guitar. They all kind of resonated with me as, similar to techniques I've used, especially with the alternate tunings that I do. And the different, unlike, say, an acoustic guitar or a 12-string, but obviously he takes it just a little bit further. And yeah, it was an inspiring, awesome chat that I had with Buzz. So please enjoy. And to introduce you to his music, here's the track Lightness of Being off of his album, The Realm of Endless Concepts. I didn't even know where to start, I guess. I because I'm not the most traditional of interviewers, but um did you originally start on classical guitar, or did you start on electric and transition over to classical originally?
Original, so classical or fretless? Because I have a
Yeah,
long
classical,
kind of.
sorry. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. No, no. I started out as a kid playing guitar around age, 10, um, doing electric guitar, and Eddie Van Halen and all of that. And I still play electric guitar. It's still part of what I do. I think what you'll find out as you talk to me is I'm kind of eclectic, and I've always been that way, and I kind of pride myself that way on that. So I played a lot of electric guitar. Still play a lot of electric guitar, blues, jazz, rock. But I studied jazz, fusion, and then I went to college at UCLA and studied classical guitar. So for about, I got my undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degree in music, in classical guitar. So while I was there, it was almost a decade. I pretty much focused just on classical guitar. I think I didn't pick up on the electric for 8 or 9 years.
Oh wow.
But then after I got out, I picked it up, and so I had that whole body of, I guess, perspective. Sure, my chops were a little bit rusty in terms of using a pick and all the rest, but that was easily fixed. It gave me a much wider perspective than just a kind of straight classical guitarist.
Oh wow, that's cool. And because I was kind of in a similar situation, rock guitar player and or electric guitar player, and then getting ready to go to college and being like, well, of course I want to study music. And then it's like, okay, well, if you're going to do it, you got to do classical. And so then became the process of, oh, and and was that kind of your same experience too, or did you kind of go into it knowing you wanted to pursue classical?
I knew I wanted to pursue classical. Um, I was always hungry for technical challenges. I guess I've always been a technical player,
Hmm.
and I was always curious. So I was curious about classical guitar repertoire. I had bought some music and kind of messed around with Bach in high school and took some lessons, but I knew that um, I really was just kind of fishing in the dark. So I had enough chops and enough reading where I could get in and study classical, but I really embraced it. And I have to admit that um, I had two teachers at college that really just opened up my mind, and they were very, very unconventional teachers. I think there's a lot of, and it's not completely unfounded, kind of preconceived notions about the classical guitar world, as they're kind of insular and they only care about themselves and it's all very kind of strict and all the rest of that. But I had the two most radical kick-ass professors around that encouraged me to kick down every barrier and every wall there was. And that was also where they first encouraged me to compose and start writing music. And so I got a big dose of self-confidence, 18, 19 years old, of, oh, I can write for this. And so I think that was important later on with the fretless guitar because there's no repertoire for it. So if you want
Yeah.
to play it, you better be okay with writing music, which I
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. Either that or you better pick up your records and study them.
This is true. But the thing about see, when I got into fretless guitar about 14 years ago, there was very little models. There was a few Turkish players, but that's the one thing I liked about it is that there wasn't anybody for me to copy, or very few people
Yeah,
for me to copy. So it left me really figuring the thing out from scratch.
that's cool. I mean, it's so what I've been doing lately is I've been trying to talk to people kind of like yourself who have been doing interesting things with instruments. And, I just talked to Mark Deutsch, who created the Bazantar a couple weeks ago. And for him, it was kind of the same thing. He's like, well, I invented or created this instrument. And so I have to now spend 10 years learning actually how to, he's like, I brought it into existence, but now I got to figure out how to play it.
It's actually similar. I should tell you how I stumbled across I mean, how much do you know about the history of the fretless guitar? Most people don't know much
I
about the
don't
kind of.
really know much about the history of the fretless guitar other than, kind of like Persian instrument or the like the oud or something like that,
Right,
like
right, right,
the
right.
kind of those kind of.
Sure. So let me kind of tell you how I got involved, and my apologies in advance if I kind of ramble on, but I find this kind of an interesting story. So it was about 14 years ago, and it was completely random. I was on Craigslist looking for guitar gear, and I randomly, you know how that is, I randomly ran across a posting of some guy selling a fretless guitar, which I'd never seen, I've never heard of. It was like this alien thing, but the person was a couple miles away and it was dirt cheap. It was like 75 bucks. So I thought, well, sure, why not? So I went over there and it was a Turkish guy. And he told me about a few Turkish players. He says, oh, no, this is a thing in Turkey. And there's some great players, Erkan Or, Cenk Erdogan. And so I didn't know anything about it, but I brought it home to this studio, and I was just fascinated. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I was just fascinated by the sound of it, and as a compositional challenge. So then I went on YouTube, and I saw indeed there was, and they're mostly playing in obviously a Turkish style, with their intonation and tuning and all the rest. And they served as a bit of a model, but it was so kind of far out of my listening. I thought, okay, I need to learn how to kind of just do this myself. And so for about literally 9 years, it was just something I just messed around with, just on my own. Every so often I'd play it for people, but it was like my little private haven. And in
Yeah.
part, it was because, with classical guitar, there is a lot of pedagogy and this and that. But with this, I could do whatever I want. No one could tell me anything. It was just literally, I'm going to figure this out. And so I got pretty good at it after a while. And then I had a friend who said, Buzz, why don't you put this stuff on like Instagram? And I was like, I don't know. And I did, and it kind of got a lot of popularity. And the thing is, I had 9 years of incubation. That was the thing, because when I put it on, it's like I could really play the thing. No one had to hear me like screw up for 9 years
Yeah.
and do it badly. So it's kind of the same story, which is like I needed this incubation period, which I didn't plan this out at all in advance. It just happened to be that way. So then when I started publicly kind of showing what I could do, I had almost a decade under my belt of working out how to play the thing.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So yeah, so when you get on Instagram, it's like, oh, okay, well, you're right. You just see the fully, the accomplished version of yourself, and not the learning
Yeah,
curve.
you
Yeah.
you don't hear the hundreds of hours of deleted videos of trying to figure this out and everything. But for me, it was just a pure joy of looking at it as, like I said, it's like a compositional challenge. Because certain things it does better, certain things it struggles more with chords and all that. But for me, I found that fascinating. And I guess there's two types of players. One type that kind of runs towards that challenge, and one that runs away from it. But I have always been the type that kind of run towards it. And anyway, so what happens is then everyone looks at you as like an expert after a while. But the reality is, I kind of feel like I'm just making this up as I go along. So
Well, one thing I noticed. So leading up to the interview, I was listening to the two records of yours, and so the first one from 2011, I think, is that correct? Was it
Well, I
2000?
only have one. It's from 2019. And well, I have a 2011. No, excuse me. I do have two records. Excuse me. I have one that is only has one fretless piece on it. So the one from 2019 is um, guitar, classical guitar, and mandolin, and one fretless guitar. And the one from 2019, or is it 18, is all fretless guitar. So yes,
Right.
you are correct.
Yeah, and well, it was interesting to me, like hearing you can kind of hear that progression, at least in your composition too. I mean, just hearing the way that you were composing for the classical guitar and for the mandolin on that, and then hearing your compositions on the fretless guitar, it's like this, not like night and day, but like it almost, like, I don't know, it felt like a very natural progression to me, and it I don't know, I really reacted to it. I could hear that in the music.
Well, thank you. And it's like anything else. To be good at something, you have to do it a lot. And so the thing about recordings is you have these kind of documented markers, and so it's much easier to see one's progression. Um, but but yeah, that was my first album. And at that time, I had just that was my incubation period with fretless, and I thought, oh, I'll just put one fretless piece on there. Um, and I was doing this other stuff on mandolin, but my relationship with mandolin was the exact same thing, where I didn't really know how to play it that well. So I just jumped in head first and became very obsessive about it. And for about 7 or 8 years, it's just that's all I was doing. So you can kind of see this is a recurring theme in my
Yeah.
life, which is pick something up that I can't do and
Well, just to touch on the mandolin too for a second. I mean, I was blown away with the mandolin pieces too, because what it kind of reminded me of is I have a friend of mine named Kevin Huffnagel, and he it was funny uh, 10 years ago or whatever, when you saw a lot of these indie music artists coming, and they would pick up the ukulele and it would just be this kind of like folky thing, and he took the ukulele and started treating it like a classical guitar and creating these very intricate pieces for it. It's like, okay, you don't hear it like that. And so hearing your stuff with the mandolin reminded me of that. I'm like, oh, okay. Like I didn't even realize it was a mandolin at first. And
right, right. And that's again part of my, I guess, my artistic perspective and training. I guess it comes back to my mentors back in college. One was named Theodore Norman, and he was quite elderly when I was in college, but he was a violinist turned guitarist. And he was really involved with the avant-garde classical music scene with Stravinsky and Schoenberg and all of these really pushing the envelope guys back in the 1930s and 40s. And so he felt very comfortable in that artistic spot, and he encouraged that with his students, which is push your boundaries, just push, 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 push. And so one of the things is whenever I had any sort of crazy idea, like what if I try this? He was so supportive with all of that. So I played a lot of really intricate when I was in college, kind of art music, 20th century modernist art music. And it really helped my chops. It really helped my sight reading, my musicianship, and all this sort of stuff. And again, it widened my perspective. So I pick up a mandolin and I'm thinking, well, okay, I I want to play mandolin because I like mandolin, but now I have this entire different musical training. What if I put the two together and try to play something that like never isn't quite what I've ever heard on the mandolin? So again, it's I guess it's just a compositional challenge. And so in the end, if you're obsessive enough, you end up with something that is rather unique because of that. So
wow, that's that's really cool to hear. And it and one thing I was kind of also interested in with the in terms of your approach to the fretless guitar is I was seeing that you were doing a lot of different tunings,
yes.
and I know when I was learning classical, you very rarely, aside from maybe a Beethoven piece where I had to put it in drop D, like I never really encountered much. And I was wondering how, um, because I always find the nylon strings can be sort of fickle sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How is that of a process? Did you start in standard tuning and then just start experimenting from there?
You know what? It was I can't okay, I guess there's a different answer to that. Um, okay, I have a philosophy about creativity. And I've been kind of sharing this, which is I call them creative disruptions. In order to be truly creative, I feel that what we need to do is put creative disruptions in our pathway. Because especially if you're trained, I mean, I've trained, I've done I've paid my dues in terms of like practicing all that stuff. But the problem is all of this stuff becomes by rote, and your fingers become by rote, and your mind and your thinking happens by rote, and then you get into a rut, and then there's nothing that can pull you out of this. And it takes a certain amount of years to realize this. Um, but what I realize is, and I guess this is why the fretless inspired me so much, is I couldn't think and compose the same way because it had no frets.
Right.
And then so I thought, okay. And then once you get into that perspective, you're like, every rule is gone. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to retune it. So I don't even know what the tuning is. I don't even know what shapes. Shapes are all foreign. Everything is foreign. I'm not going to be using theory to understand this. I'm just using my ear. I am putting all of these artificial creative disruptions in order to get to a place of creativity that I wouldn't be able to access if I just took the path that I had gone down a million times in my life. So it was more of a purposeful roadblock that I'm putting in to make me again say, what can I do with this? What can I do with these tunings? I don't know what's going on here. And then I would just sit and play by ear and work it out. And lo and behold, you'd get something cool. And the great thing is I would be just as surprised by this. It would be kind of revealed to me. And I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that, or that motion of these notes going here. So for me, it served a purpose of having a new piece of music, but it also served a purpose of inspiration, which
Yeah.
is kind of ironic because you think the more roadblocks you put up, the harder it is, the more frustrated you're going to be. But at least for my psychology, it actually ends up allowing for more inspiration, if that makes sense.
It does. I play in alternate tunings all the time now in electric. I mean, right now my classical is in G minor 6 tuning,
Right.
I
Right.
think.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And and so it's just been part of my life for 20 years now, just playing in alternate tunings and learning. You know, you can't rely. Well, actually, you can sort of rely on the old shapes, but because you're in the different tunings, you're creating these whole new harmonic or chord things that are happening. And again, it trains your ear,
Absolutely.
and you're able to step outside of those boxes.
So it's interesting because I am also a music professor, and ironically, the class I teach is music theory. So I am very adept at being analytical with music, but just pointing out this note and this chord and all that stuff. But the irony is when I'm writing music with Fretless, I don't want any of that my brain extra in my brain. I just want to be thinking of, I'm thinking sometimes, oh, okay, there's a motive or there's that chord or it's a major seventh. I hear it, but I'm not analyzing it. And I
Yeah,
like to be in that space because I find it's much closer to creativity that way.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, that's kind of the way I've been living with it for
Yeah.
20 years as well. um, and aside from like you said, like technique, or but when you're in that creative space with the fretless guitar, like have like, this is kind of a weird way of putting it, but do you know what you want to say in the piece, or is it you're kind of discovering as you play that something comes and you're like, okay, this is what I'm trying to convey with this, that kind of.
I, I'm chiseling away something. It's like having a slab of marble. I don't want to be too, compare myself too grandiose, but it's like having a sculptor just chiseling away and then it reveals,
Okay.
something reveals. So there is always a spirit of improvisation, and I improvise a lot. And sometimes I have learned, even when composing and recording things, you can overcompose and it can become too solid. So I've learned when to keep it just loose enough because I want the listener to have that sense of it isn't a completely set in stone moment, right? And you know how it is where you play something and it's beautiful, and then every time you do it again and again, it's just a slight bit less. And you don't know if it's because you know it's coming up or if it's just because it's codified and it's the same thing. And I'm trying to capture that one moment where the spark is just there. And if you do it 50 times and practice it 50 times, then it just becomes a codified lick or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and its moment of beauty is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with that. It's and it's tough. And the other thing I've experienced too is not really naming my pieces or writing down the tuning I'm in. So I'll find this really beautiful thing I wrote 10 years ago, but I don't remember what tuning it's in, or how to play it. And so I'm like, oh, cool. It exists there, but I'll never be able to recreate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's what I do with my pieces sometimes because I'll put new stuff out on social media and I'll put the tuning, but there's been plenty of times where I'll have to go back and relearn what I played, or just say, hey, it was just of the moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find it easier to write something new than to go back and figure out how it is. Um, and that's the important thing for me is I just always want to have the inspiration to create something new. I sometimes get bogged down trying to learn my older stuff again. And when I do, it's again, it doesn't have that spark. It doesn't. It's just so. It's interesting because I finally feel like with my fretless playing, I've gotten to the point where I feel like I'm doing it the way I want to do it. I'm not trying to play other people's music. I'm not trying to follow the rules of how it should be done. And I'm simply like, okay, if I don't want to play that piece again, I'm not going to play it. It's gone. It's whatever. I'm just going to write a new one. And the most important thing is I feel inspired to write something new. So I feel no guilt about having pieces that I've completely played and just left them because they have a document. If they have a video, there's a document. Hey, it was of the moment. And if I'm inspired, I feel like I could do some more.
Oh wow, that's awesome. I just want to say right now, like this has been a very inspiring chat so far. I'm already feeling inspired. As soon as I get off, I'm just gonna go grab that and
Well,
well,
you know what? If there's any one thing, just because I've been doing this for so long, um, I've come to these realizations. But even sometimes when I come to these realizations, I think to myself, what the hell took me so long to realize this? To realize that, we always think that there's a should, I should, I should, I should, I should. And in a certain sense, you learn the shoulds, but you don't really get to the heart of it until you finally say, no, I'm going to do what my inner voice tells me to do. And then once you do that, at least for me, I feel like, well, what took me so long?
yeah,
You know what I mean? And I think we
yeah.
all kind of know that, but we all have that kind of voice in the back of our head that says, well, I should do this, I should do that.
I just want to jump in to say thank you for listening, and here are the ways that you can support us. Subscribe to The Color of Air on your favorite podcast app like Apple, Stitcher, Radio Public, or Spotify, and be sure to rate and review. Also follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/retcongreg. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/Ret Con Industries, where we have 3 monthly subscription tiers of $1, $5, and $10. Depending on which tier you choose, you will have your name listed in the credits for every future podcast and music release, as well as access to bonus audio and video content, Bandcamp discounts, and exclusive merchandise through the Ret Con Swag Club. Finally, please check out all the music up for sale at retconindustries.bandcamp.com. And now, back to the podcast.
Now, in terms of the fretless guitar, I know you said you found the first one on Craigslist. As you progressed in it, what was the process like of finding new ones? Were you able to find, like a I don't want to say a better model, but
Yeah. Well, no, this is a an interesting story because this was after I had that one, and it was a cheap guitar, but the conversion, it was a converted guitar,
right,
which so I found out, okay, that's a thing, and so I went and I looked, and no, at the time, major classical guitar manufacturer made a fretless classical guitar. There's a few luthiers that will make them for $2,000-3,000 for you, but there was no guitar company that would make one. So I said, okay, I bought a classical and I had it converted, and I didn't know if it was going to be a waste of money. I spent about $300 on the conversion and had a pickup put into it, but it worked for a while. But I realized is I was getting all of these messages almost every day from people saying, "Oh, I want one. Where can I get one?" And I kept on saying, "Sorry, you got to convert one. Can I do it myself?" I was like, "Well, it's not the hardest, it's not the easiest. You might screw it up." So, and unfortunately, that dissuaded about 95% of the people. There was always a few do-it-yourselfers that would do it. And I heard some great conversions, and I heard some really bad conversions because you got to lower the action and all that stuff. So, anyways, I said, okay, this is a problem. If I want to help bring exposure to this instrument, and all these people want to play it, there needs to be a company that makes these things because I know there's a market for them. So I spent about 3 years approaching different guitar companies just whenever the opportunity arose and said, look, there's a market for fretless classical guitars. If you will make a production model, I can guarantee you you can sell some. And they all said, no, no, there's no market. There's no market. It's a nice thing. Okay, it's a parlor trick, blah, blah, blah. They were polite, but they weren't, into it. But I was just persistent until about, oh gosh, a year and a half ago. through a mutual friend, there's a company based out of Hong Kong called Altamira, and they're a classical guitar company. They don't have a big worldwide presence in selling guitars here in the United States, but I told them that, and they said, "Yeah, yeah, sure, we'll make you a prototype." And the main CEO is a guitar maker himself that studied in Spain, and so the prototype was great. And then I said, well, "Look, can I help you design, modify, from the factory a line of your guitars as fretless ones?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "There's a market." So I guess the business person side of me said, "Okay, let me just take this as more than just a artist representative." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to start a company." And so me and this other guitarist named Mark Gergich, and he's a classical guitarist, we started a company called G&G Guitars, and we've worked with Altamira, so we are the exclusive resellers of their fretless guitars, and they're the only company right now, major guitar company, that makes these fretless classical guitars. There are luthiers, and again, you could convert if you want, but this hits a certain price point. So yeah, I have 3 guitars from Altamira that I'm looking to ship out now. We've probably sold about 80 of them in the last year.
That's amazing. And and I saw that you had started that and you were selling them. And one thing I really appreciated, like you said, was the price point. I just, you always hear like classical guitars are going to be super expensive. But the fact that you're making a moderately priced instrument to help get this exposure is just, I think it's incredible.
Well, because I understand, being kind of a guitarist for so long, no one buys a fretless as their first guitar, even their second guitar.
Yeah.
But I know guitar players, if you have 2, usually have 10.
Mm.
So, myself included.
Yep.
So I'm thinking, okay, people will spend a certain amount of money, and that was really important because if someone's, oh, I can spend $3,000, you're not going to have a market for that. But someone's like, okay, I spend $700, I'll do it. And we're bringing out a even more basic entry model that we're trying to bring out for 550, which I think will really interest people just to get their feet wet. Because I guess the larger picture is this: is I guess I have some legacy goals, which is I want to popularize this. I want it to be in 20, 30, 40 years something that's as common as the fretless electric bass. It's just like, I'm sure when Jocko was around, everyone's like, oh, this is, just something that's kind of a parlor trick that only he does. And then now it's like a legit, as we all know, it's a legitimate variation of the electric bass. So that's what I'm looking to do, but you got to get guitars in people's hands.
Yeah.
You got to get them and get them making music, and then it kind of spreads out. So that is really, in the last couple of years, been a major, I guess, impetus of what I want to do in helping popularize the instrument. I want to make my music. I want to bring exposure as an artist to it, but I want to make sure that if someone wants to play one, they can buy one.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. And well, I definitely want to buy one at some point because I'm
Yeah,
fascinated by it.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
um, well, and as you've been, getting more exposure over the past few years, have you been able to kind of travel and do presentations or conferences? I know the pandemic probably,
I was going to say COVID.
yeah, that probably cut a bunch of that, but
Yeah, yeah, COVID really did. Well, that is the other thing, is I want to definitely do that more. So NAM will be back this year, so we're going to be doing NAM. But I'm working with Altamira, and we might have some Asian concerts and whatnot because they're interested in expanding out to that market and just playing. Absolutely, I want to play more. I want to play more. I want to perform more. Every opportunity I can to do that, and even have presentations. But I also would love to have it because I just think it fits well in this context, is to bring exposure to it by having it placed in some television or movie or something like that. And so, I mean, I'm in LA, but this isn't always easy to do.
yeah.
Um, this is easier said than done. But so, I'm looking at all sorts of exposure for the instrument, as much as it is exposure for me. So, I'm just waiting for some guitar player who like really comes up and then just blows me away, and it's like, oh man, that's great. Then I've done something. I've kind of passed the torch,
Yeah.
and so that's what I'm hoping to set the stage to be able to do.
And to that end, have you also been? I know you mentioned when you first started there wasn't really a repertoire out there. Are you prepping any kind of book?
Yes, as you probably can tell, of course I am. Now, as with everything, these things end up being going slowly. But what I also realize is because, I get a certain amount of people who say they buy a fretless guitar and then they want to take some lessons, because I've heard a lot of people recently who are new to fretless guitar. So I can see what they're struggling with, right? And I realize, okay, don't do it that way. It's not going to sound good. Do it this way. So I'm working on a method series, and I want it to be something that has lots of videos and is comprehensive. And obviously, it's going to be from my perspective, but I want to do it right. And so that's the other thing that this needs. I mean, it needs instruments to popularize a fretless guitar. You need to have instruments out there. You need to have some sort of guidance or pedagogy, because I realize not everyone's like me who runs to it because there's nobody to tell them what to do. A lot of people get overwhelmed because of that. So I want the guidance to be creativity based, but to give kind of a direction for people to go in. Because the thing about the fretless guitar is there's so many different styles that it can be used for, um, that I only touch a little bit of. But you can use it to play a lot of Middle Eastern music and Makam-based music, Indian ragas, Far Eastern music. You can do American kind of like bottleneck slide stuff. You can use it in so many different contexts, that I want to make sure that the method book allows for people to explore all of those things. But yeah, it's going to have videos and maybe a website and the whole thing. And so you have the pedagogy, you have the instrument, and then obviously it has to you have to inspire people. So I think the heart of it all is, and this is easy because this is what I like to do, is just to write music that people dig. And if you write music people dig, then they take the next step. And that's what I want, though. I want the instrument, the method, the exposure, all that.
That's awesome. And I love the compositions that you've put out for it. I mean, I feel like on this podcast, I just end up complimenting people for like a half hour straight, but they are really incredible compositions. And
but thank you. I mean, I'm glad. It's interesting because when people say that, I have to admit, I find that a much more heartfelt compliment that touches me more than someone saying, "Oh man, you shred on it. Like, how do you play in tune?" That sort of thing, right? I'm like, I want people to say, "No, that's good music," So, anyways, thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And well, actually, just as a side note, when you mentioned shredding on it, that reminded me. I for a while I worked as an intern at the National Guitar Summer Workshop, and I was hanging out with one of the classical guys who was there, and they also had like the big rock metal shred guys there, and apparently
Yep.
the classical guy had brought he had his kind of like teaching model, but then he had his professional what he performs with however many thousands of dollars.
Right.
And apparently the shred guy was like, "Oh, can I take a look at that?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And apparently it was just like running like all these like Ingve licks or whatever. And the guy was like, "Oh my god."
But you know what? I think that sort of stylistic melting pot of stuff is good. I think it's good. Actually, Joe, here's another thing that's interesting: is I am just as much, I guess, aware of the kind of the downsides of social media as anyone else. But I have to admit that for Instagram and stuff, I can jump between different styles of guitar players so easily that it's kind of nice. Because again, I'm someone who's really eclectic, and I'll want to see someone who's playing like just great blues and then great classical and then great jazz, and I just back and forth and back and forth. I find that kind of inspirational.
Yeah, same. And as you have kind of gotten into your professional career as a professor, have you encountered any kind of weird, conservative thinking, from music departments.
Well, okay, here's the ironic thing. Getting back to social media, is there, and boy, I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but the one community that seems to be the least responsive, interested in fretless classical guitar is the classical guitar community, because classical guitar community tends to be conservative, tradition bound, and kind of proud of it. And there's a streak of more um, exploratory, new music aficionados within it. But there's a lot of people who are drawn to it because of its tradition and because of its codifications of procedures and all the rest of that sort of stuff. So that's where I get pushback, right?
Hmm.
That's where I'm like, oh, it's a parlor trick. Oh, it's that or this, whatever. Where I am just amazed at where I find a lot of interest is people from all over the world, not just like, again, like guitar shredders and that sort of stuff, but you find, I mean, the whole Middle Eastern world, and then, like I said, India and the Far East, they're finding inspiration in it in ways that I didn't expect, right? So that's where I realized, wow, this Brazil, I have a tremendous amount of followers from Brazil. Wow. So I'm amazed at the worldwide acceptance and interest in it, but it's the classical guitar community, especially the very conservative element of it, is the only one element that, they tend to just kind of pass me by. That's fine. There's nothing active. I don't get a lot of hate, but there's not a lot of like, oh, this is great. So that's why, even though it's a classical guitar and it's a nylon string guitar, for me, it's just another way to look at it, is like, this is not anything to do with classical guitar per se. This
Right,
is
right.
my training. This is and part of my training is as a classical guitarist, but it's part of my training as an electric guitar player and jazz, and as a composer and as contemporary music. And so I'm just playing it on this. But I think that's one of the things that, again, makes me sound different, is I just discarded everything. And so I have no desire to be part of any community.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to fit in with anybody. I'm just like, I'm going to do it my way, and if you don't like it, keep scrolling.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
um so just getting back into a couple of the other kind of technical questions about the fretless guitar that fascinate me. So, in terms of using the alternate tunings, are do you have like specific guitars that are in specific tunings at all times, or are you like kind of fiddling? Like, because I've always, how does the guitar respond to being constantly changed?
Well, I'll keep it in there for a couple of days, or I'll just have my tuner
Yeah.
constantly fiddling with it. Um, so yeah, you don't want your fretless to have its open strings out of tune, because then you're really screwed with intonation. But it settles. It's no problem. But I've done some extreme tunings where I've tuned it up in up a minor third up on the top E string, and so you breaks king. So I've tried a lot of different things, but I let it settle for a day or two. But I have a couple fretless guitars, so sometimes I'll have one in standard and another tuning, and then I just earlier today have a new tuning that I'm messing with, and I have to kind of put up with the fact that the strings are going to be a little bit wonky for today, and then tomorrow it should be settled in.
Oh, okay. And as you were learning on the fretless guitar, what was trying to see if I can think of the best way to describe this. What was like one thing that you discovered on it that you're like, oh, I can do this now that I have with the fretless. Were there
Right.
any techniques?
Well, yes. It sounds more like a voice. It sounds more like a human voice because you have all of the expressive glissando.
Yep.
So if you want to think of it as a melodic instrument, I mean, it just had a certain, I guess, greater emotional palette. It sounded sadder. It sounded more mournful. Just because of the glissando and the vibrato and the microtones that just a nuance that, yeah, sure, on electric you can bend and quarter step bend and all the rest of that, but I mean the railings are completely off on the fretless. So you could play something very simply. And this is what it was. It wasn't about all this crazy stuff at first. It was like, oh, I could just play a simple melody and it sounds like something so mournful. And it just connected. I realized I thought that everyone did this, but I've seen people pick it up for the first time, and I realized everyone doesn't hear that. But for me, that was almost the first day I picked it up. That's what brought me to it. It was just, oh, there's a type of expression that I wasn't able to get, and I still have that in my playing. So that's what I base it on. And I always tell people when you first play, just play a simple melody and maybe with a drone. Um, and if you can make that sound beautiful, then you have the heart of it. You have the heart of the fretless guitar. And so I always, in my music, I always try to keep that. Um, I always try to remember that.
Okay. And you were saying that, chords can sometimes prove difficult on it. Um, so what was kind of your, I don't want to say workaround, but how do you then deal with that on the fretless guitar? Do you just not do chords, or is
Well,
it
no,
just
I mean, no, okay. So the hard part about chords for people listening isn't to play them per se; it's to play them in tune.
yeah,
Um, because obviously every note that you're putting your finger down on, you have to tune up. But yes, there is workarounds. I have a whole different philosophy of chords. So you have to throw out the way you've learned chords. So I mean, as a guitar player, you know this. We learn when we first start our open string chords are D's and G's and C's. And then after a few months, you get to that bar chord, that F chord that's hard. And then you have your bar chords. And then you could go further and do different, shapes and everything. But that's the standard way people learn chords. Well, let's just throw that out the window. Because you're not going to play an F bar chord. Like even now, I'm not going to play it because of the way the fingers are. You're just not going to be in tune. So the easiest thing to do is when I'm playing a chord, usually I am always playing at least one open string. Because the open string is number one, always in tune. And number two, it's the part that sounds like a standard guitar. If you play an open string, you can't tell if it's a fretless or a standard guitar.
Mhm.
When you play a note, you stop a note because you're stopping it on the soft pad of your finger as opposed to the fret wire. It's a little bit darker, so it has a little tonal difference, right? But an open string is an open string. So I say, okay, the easiest thing is to have a one-fingered chord. You just have your open strings and your one finger. If you have an alternate tuning, that's fine. But obviously you're limited what you can do. So then I say the next thing you need to do is look for two-fingered shapes. And then so you have two-fingered shapes and the shapes in which your fingers are not on adjacent strings. So if have a finger on string 2 and string 3, that's going to be the hardest, or 1 and 2. But string 1 and 3, 2 and 4, 3 and 5, 4 and 6 is easy, or even 1 and 4, 2 and 5. So it has to do with verticality, how much space you have vertically. And then if you look at it like this, is if you're on the same position, like quote second fret, it's going to be the hardest because you have to be in tune. So if you're spread out like this, like second position, third position, it's easier. So you're looking at from geometrical positionings of your fingers um, for ease and versus difficulty. And then there's a whole set of different things you can do that way. Then you could add 3 fingers in, and it's the same concept. And then the hardest thing is going to be 4 fingers. So you're completely rethinking what is easy and difficult on a chord based on criteria that have nothing to do with the standard guitar. Now, I had to figure this all out and kind of codify this myself. But once you do that, and then you add open tunings, then you get a whole different world of possibilities. So again, it's this idea of creative disruptions. Because I can't use the same idea of thinking of chords, I have to come up with new conceptual frameworks. And so that's the chordal conceptual framework. But I use two-fingered chords all the time with at least 1 or 2 open strings, and I use those open strings to intonate my other stopped notes.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I'm doing. I don't have perfect pitch, but I have pretty good relative pitch, and I'm always tuning up according to my open strings. Is that a fifth? Is that a major third? Is that a minor sixth? How's that sounding in tune?
That's awesome. I mean, that actually reminds me of how I approach alternate tunings anyway, which is I try to find 1 or 2
chord, like 2-finger chords with the open strings,
Yeah.
and then I'm trying to hear how everything relates in terms of the open string, what's coming out of it.
Right.
Or yeah,
So what I'm doing isn't like it doesn't have precedence. It's just people on classical guitar don't think that way
yeah.
because you're thinking of it more like a folk guitarist who's interested in open tunings, right? And
Hmm.
so there's a whole tradition of that, but it's just those traditions haven't met yet. So that's all I'm trying to do because my eclectic nature, I'm trying to think differently and put different things in different contexts.
That's awesome. um, and this is probably coming from the folk guitar aspect of me. Do you mess around with capos at all on it?
A little bit. I haven't messed around too much, um, but it's one of those things where I feel like, okay, I'm going to keep looking into this. Um, so ask me in a year, and I might have a different answer on that.
Okay, because it's always been my approach with it, with any instrument. I'm like, oh, can I put it in an alternate tuning? Let me try putting a capo on it and see what happens.
Yeah, the capo is just a little bit finicky
I can
with the
imagine.
fretless,
Yeah, I
and
can
that's all
imagine.
it is. So it's but I've ideas of partial capos and other things like that too. So it is something that I'm looking to explore. I mean, the basic way I look at it is, soon as I start feeling like I'm in a rut, I'm going to throw something in the mix, so that I'm going to have to think differently.
Creative disruption.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
There's one thing I'm taking away from this is
Oh
creative
yeah.
disruptions.
Yeah, yeah. So it's funny. I use this analogy. I've used this analogy for so long, and it's just such a beautiful analogy for that creative disruption. And this is, I heard about this as a, I guess, undergraduate creative writing assignment, and it made such sense, where the teacher would assign the students to write a short story. I don't know, 2 or 3 pages, but they would have to pick a letter of the alphabet that they couldn't use. So let's say you couldn't use the letter S. Well, write your story, whatever. You just can't use S. And that's the perfect example of creative disruption, because you can't use certain words. So you have to use different words to describe the same concept, but then your description of it is going to be in a way that you never would have done before if you had access to that S in that tool. Take that tool out of the bag, and all of a sudden you have to use your other tools, your other letters of the alphabet, more creatively. And so it's
Mhm.
the same concept I use for my composing.
That's awesome. That's me. Wow. Well, this has been. I don't know if I have any other questions, but I feel very enlightened and very inspired. So I appreciate you taking this time, Buzz. I mean, this is so cool.
But that's the thing, what I'm trying to help people with, because just on that point, I get, again, a lot of messages, and the ones that I enjoy the most are like the ones where you say, oh, I like the compositions, but also I get messages from guitar players all over the world who say, oh, you've gotten me out of rut. I'm so inspired to hear this. And what I realize is there's a lot of guitar players that love playing guitar, but they've trained themselves into a rut, and it wasn't like they wanted to get into a rut, or but there's always a kind of this sense of guilt, like, why I'm in a rut. But it's just a natural consequence if you can train yourself into this. So if anything, if I can say certain things, or through my music explain certain things, to say, no, you can get yourself out of this rut, you just have to think differently. And I guess I'm a contrarian that way, but I'm glad, and it's working for me. And I'm just saying, hey, it's working for me, so you should try it too. So if it has the same effect on you, I think that's great.
Okay. And along that same lines, I mean, so if you're coming at an instrument from, especially like classical guitar, where you're coming from a tradition and there's very specific exercises and you know traditions, obviously inherent in the way, like the specific pedagogy and everything. Do you kind of advise, you know, like the like learning the rules and then being able to break them? You know what I mean? Like like having a grounded, traditional technical approach, and then being able to, but not letting it dictate everything. But
That is a, God, I have a sense of responsibility in answering that question, because it's a very important question. Um, best I could say is, I take the philosophy with my own teaching. Everyone is different, and what everyone needs is different.
Okay.
And so some people need to buckle down and learn how to get the basic materials under their fingers before you can be creative. Because there's the other side of the coin too, which is, okay, I'm speaking from a creative mind point, but I was practicing 5, 6 hours a day for years and doing, putting in the work. So I have a certain kind of amount of gas in the tank that I can rely on. And I've seen people try to do this where they don't have that. And so I guess it's about a balance. Um, but on the other hand, I have seen people who have never been told now's the time to break the rules and be creative. And so the problem is with anything, it's like a muscle. Creativity is a muscle. If you don't use it, it's going to atrophy. So you have to start using it. And that's why it's such a personal decision. And it's hard for me to give blanket answers because everyone is on a different point in the journey. I mean, I feel like if I was talking to myself uh, to my 20 years ago, I might not get what I'm saying to myself right now. I'd be like, I'm not there yet. This is all sounding nice and high-minded. So I feel like part of the reason why I'm here is because I've stuck with it so long. And everyone has to go through these journeys and these moments of self-discovery. And you can't have a 17-year-old kid all of a sudden discover this stuff. You have to go through every stage. I remember being 16, all I wanted to do was shred, and then, I got a certain level of proficiency, and it was like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
It was, and then so it's kind of the same thing with all my life. It's always like, well, I can do that. Now what?
Yeah.
So it's a really hard question to blanket say, oh, you should get the basics down and build up a certain level because yeah, you want to do that, but where's the sweet spot? That's the key because that's different for everyone.
All right. And what what kind of projects are you working on next? Do you have any records that you're working on, or?
I am. I'm trying to because now I have my guitars with Altamir, and they're kind of an inspiration for me because they play so well. And I feel like it's pushed my composing into a new level. So I am slowly working on a new album of solo fretless guitar music. It's interesting because I wanted to make sure I finished my first album, and you feel this momentum and you want to do it again, but I don't want to rehash. I don't want to just do, volume two. So I wanted to make sure that I grew enough artistically in my compositions. So if I put out another album, it will have a different flavor, a decidedly different flavor, an evolution, so to speak. So it's been a couple of years, but I'm starting to feel now, okay, I'm a different player than I was 3 years ago. Now's the time to start recording this. So definitely, I want to put out another fretless album.
Okay, cool. And the question everyone asks in a podcast: where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me, well, at all my stuff. Okay, so I have my website, buzzgravelle.com. And then I am on Instagram at fret, F-R-E-T underscore buzz, B-U-Z-Z. It's my attempt at a joke.
I laughed.
There you go. There you go. Fret buzz. Um, but of course, when you make your name, you don't have any followers yet, so you don't feel there's any consequence to this. You're like, I'll just name it this. Who cares? And I don't have a follower. And then all of a sudden, people come to know you by this name, and like it was some big thought out joke. It's like, no, I just had to come up with something. So it's the same thing for TikTok, fret underscore buzz, and then Buzz Gravelle um, on Facebook.